by Steve Austin.
Chapter 3. To Turn a Witch.
Will he live, Martis?
Asked Oddicum.
Well, he is very strong, and being half elf, half sprite, his natural resistance and penchant for self-rejuvenation is quite high. We got to him quickly, and that too is in his favor. He was pierced with several Dusel darts, but we got to him in time to arrest the progress of the poison before it reached his heart. Yes, he will recover, but it will be a long process.
Aside from dark magic, the Dusel dart is the preferred weapon of Marfo witches. The tips are dipped in a toxin derived from the bile of the Dusilin toad. The toad can extract it through ducts on its tongue to subdue its prey. It causes paralysis, and if the dose is high enough once it reaches the prey's heart, it is distributed to the neural system and shuts down muscle response. The diaphragm being the first muscle to cease functioning, the victim will suffocate. Marfo witches can alter the dosage to produce darts which simply paralyze the victim temporarily, permanently, or cause nearly instantaneous death. The witches color code the darts. Darts with green feathers cause temporary paralysis. Yellow feathers render a victim paralyzed for life, and red feathers are a death sentence. Thinking to himself, Oddicum began to reason out the events currently playing out. What was the correlation between the attack on Generid, the ogres, and Minerva?
This does not add up. Marfo witches are expert in the use of Dusilin. Regardless of whether the witch wanted the victim dead, temporarily subdued, or permanently paralyzed, the dose would be adjusted so that one dart, and one dart alone, achieved the desired effect. Considering the fact that Generid was pierced with many low-dose green-feathered darts, which combined were enough to kill him, but didn't. Because, since there were several injection points, the toxin didn't find its way to his heart as quickly as it would have had there been a high dose injected with a single dart. This gave the healers time to counter the poison before it could deprive him of his life. The only conclusion one can draw is that the darts were fired by someone not versed in their use. The real question is, how did Marfo witch weaponry fall into the hands of another species? Before passing out, Generid had mentioned Minerva and ogres. The report Shanaeah sent 4 days ago stated that a high-ranking Marfo witch was leading a sortie of ogres toward Rorsch. Had Minerva supplied Dusel darts to proc ogres? The evidence seemed to indicate just that, but that still sheds no light on the major question at large. Why? Why has Minerva aligned herself with the sworn enemy of the Order? He also mentioned breeding. Was Minerva breeding an army of proc ogres? But most importantly, where is my daughter?
Renata squeezed Oddicum's hand and jolted him from his deep train of thought.
What's going on, Oddicum? What do we do?
We find Shanaeah, and we find her fast. We'll send a runner to summon Lieutenant Ranneman. We'll have him first assign some soldiers to find whatever beings that attacked Captain Generid. Then we shall discuss assembling a sortie of our finest Boniscan soldiery along with some gnomish intel thieves and send them to Rorsch. If she's being held in the Rorschian dungeons, as I suspect she is, the intel thieves will find her quickly. For one, they are beyond proficient at the art of intel. And secondly, and perhaps more importantly, the gnomish have a deep-seated love for our daughter. May the Inherent bless them.
But what of Minerva? And the ogres aren't going to allow Ranneman to simply walk in and take her, if she is even there.
I'm hoping that at this point we are only dealing with a single Marfo witch in the very early stages of organizing her new allies. That hopefully being the case, perhaps the intel thieves will be able to get Shanaeah out of the dungeons through stealth alone and no violence will be required. But if they can't, then I have no qualms with Lieutenant Ranneman drawing blood.
But Oddicum, if it were possible for gnomes to rescue her, wouldn't the gnomish contingency you sent with her have already done so?
Oddicum sighed deeply. He had been avoiding thinking about the fact that he himself had sent Shanaeah, his own daughter, to face the fate she is currently enduring.
We don't know if the gnomes who accompanied Shanaeah to southern Penichery were captured along with her or not. And those particular gnomes, though stealthy enough, as is characteristic of their species, were not intel thieves. Considering all this, stealth shall be Plan A, and force, Plan B. I need to dispatch the runner. I want Ranneman and Danish in the contravisory within the hour.
About 45 minutes later, the meeting Oedicum had ordered convened. Oedicum sat at the head of the long, heavy table in the controvisory, named so because it is the room in the palace of Boniscus where plans were contrived and advice was given and received. Seated to his right was Lieutenant Ranaman, to his left Denish, a much-renowned gnome who had for the last 50 years served as the chief of the Donavarian intel thieves. Renata was seated at the foot of the table, her beautiful stained glass dragonfly wings twitching gently behind her chair, a sign among Genarian sprites that the sprite in question was either nervous or scared, or both.
Gentlemen and Renata, as you likely are already aware, we have a situation which has developed south of Penichery that requires immediate action. From the tidbits of intel we have ascertained thus far, we fear that my daughter, Shanaeah, is being held captive in the Proc-Ogre dungeons of Rorsch.
He went on to tell them of the condition of Captain Janirid, and explain the strategy he had already disclosed to Renata prior to this meeting.
Ranaman, Denish, how soon can you assemble the forces I have described and be in Rorsch, poised to implement our plans?
Denish responded thusly.
Lord Oedicum, you know I would gladly give my life for Shanaeah, yet as deeply as it burns a hole into my spirit to think of her in the clutches of those foul beings, in actuality, a force could not assemble and be ready to advance until morning. At the earliest, it will be tomorrow evening before we see the dim lights of Rorsch.
Then Ranaman added,
I concur, my lord Oedicum. We can depart at first light, but after a sleepless night of preparation for the journey and a 38-mile march, we shall arrive at the dungeons late evening and exhausted. If attack does prove to be necessary, it would be the wee hours of the following morning before our forces could muster the strength to prevail against the ogres. And that is also wagering that there is but one Marfo witch to deal with. If there are several, it will take at least another 4 hours for the potion needed to counter the Marfo madness spell to be prepared and take effect.
A slight digression here. Marfo madness is the second most powerful spell a Marfo witch can conjure, behind the Climaxis Mortis, and in the bulk of situations, the more useful of the two. The Climaxis Mortis spell, while usually always fatal, can only be cast while the intended victim is participating in coital activity with the witch who casts the spell. And since there is usually no one fucking during a battle, it is relatively useless under that particular circumstance. But the Marfo madness spell has no such limitation, and can be successfully cast upon any unprepared victim. Once the full effect of the spell is active, the victim is overcome by total insanity. Whatever task the victim was performing is abandoned, and the helpless victim will turn upon his friends in a most violent manner. Casting this spell in bulk or pluralis over a battle pretty much turns the tide to the witch's favor, and concludes the battle with the witches emerging victorious. Fortunately, the potion which counters the spell is brewed from herbs readily available most anywhere in Aeros. But unfortunately it does, as Ranaman explained, require that at least 4 hours time pass after the potion is ingested before it takes full effect. Oedicum then continued.
We could send a detachment of sprites. They have a natural immunity to Marfo madness. But I suppose that would actually cost us time, as we would have to make a detour through Tenella, the sprite capital, to gather the force, and taking preparation time into consideration as well, we would add another 24 hours to our timeline. I should have sent this sortie out yesterday, but hindsight gains us nothing. Very well, the wee hours of tomorrow will have to do. I pray Shanaeah can hold on until then.
At that, Renata spread her beautiful stained glass dragonfly wings and ascended above the table.
My daughter shall live. She shall return to me unharmed. The blessings of the Inherent be upon you, Ranamon. Denish, now go, bring my daughter home to me.
And Oedicum added,
I echo the sentiments of my concubine. May the blessings inherent follow you as you leave Boniscus in the morning. Depart now with spirits high.
We must digress again here. The Inherent. The inhabitants of Aeros have no deity per se, but they believe there is a circle of power which encompasses the elements, earth, wind, fire, and water, and all forms of life, plant, animal, and the sentient species. This circle is referred to as the Inherent. When an Aronian wishes you blessings inherent, they are expressing their hope that the circle of power encompasses you within. When an Aronian says, "Hail the Inherent," It can be an acknowledgement of the inherent's very existence, its involvement or influence in a current situation or circumstance, or simply the Aaronian equivalent to the modern-day expression, "Oh my goodness." Meanwhile, back in Harless, Jerome awoke well-rested and rejuvenated. A quick glance to his left revealed a beautiful gnomish maiden still slumbering after an evening of intense entertainment. As Shanaeah continued to dream in the bed next to Jerome, he reflected on the festivities of the previous night. After his long conversation with Mithila had concluded, almost as if planned that way, Shanaeah arrived at the door of his suite. He let her in, and after pleasantries were exchanged, Jerome, Mithila, and Shanaeah engaged in an intense session of lovemaking. At one point, toward the end of the tryst, Mithila began to murmur in a language neither Shanaeah or Jerome understood. The louder she murmured, the more each lady began to tremble. Mithila, of course, was casting a spell. Specifically, the Orgasmanial was the incantation Mithila was repeating. Its effect would soon be evident, and it was one spell that a condyle couldn't prevent. The Orgasmanial, once repeated the prescribed number of times, would cause the Marfo witch and whomever she was in physical contact with at the time to orgasm violently and repeatedly. Pleasure nearly unbearable. Later, in Rorsch, Minerva cackled as Shanaeah spat the vinegar-laced witch milk she had just given her onto the filthy dungeon floor.
It was but a joke, my dear. Simple, good-natured jest. No need for such vile expressions aimed at your hostess. I feel my hospitality has been more than adequate thus far, don't you? Crimmage, bring our lovely elven sprite a flagon of tonic water.
This is water from the springs of the Tahanic Mountains, the most nourishing and tasty water in Aeros.
Yes, Madam Palatar. Have it for ye in a shake of a dragon's tail, I will.
Fetch a loaf of baniscus bread and a jug of Marfo milk with honey as well, you creepy little sniffer of troll asses. Our maiden is going to need her strength to handle what is coming next.
With that, Minerva came up alongside the coital torture table and put her nose less than an inch from Shanaeah's.
You think I have that group of shit-eating maggots subject to my authority, bitch? That's nothing compared to the fate that awaits you. Before I am through with you, little slut, you will grovel at my feet and pray that I allow you to kiss them. Your head will be so far up my ass you'll taste my breakfast before I do. My whim will be your will. You will worship me as if I am your personal deity. Before the sun rises tomorrow morning, 26 hours from now, your lofty elven sprite Manista spirit will be broken to a point from which it can never be resurrected, and I shall enjoy every second of your conditioning. Breaking you shall be an immense pleasure for me.
At this point, Crimmage returned with the sparse meal Minerva had ordered for Shanaeah.
Feed and water this worthless bitch. I shall return at sunup to continue her training. Prop her up and hand-feed her yourself, Crimmage. Do not remove any of her bonds. When she is done with her meal, return to me in the main hall. Enjoy your meal, elven whore. Upon my return, you shall learn the meaning of the Marfo phrase, pleasure to the pain, and you will submit completely to the will of the order.
With that, Minerva left the cell and Crimmage saddled up to the table and propped Shanaeah up that she might eat. He held the flagon to her lips, and she swallowed the spring water eagerly. Aside from a few sips a day of water from the creek, and Minerva's breast milk earlier, Shanaeah had been deprived of hydration. She could feel the restorative properties of the tonic water working to rejuvenate her dehydrated tissues. Crimmage set the flagon down and held a piece of the baniscus loaf to her lips. She took a bite into her famished mouth. After 4 days without food, the bread was seemingly the most delicious substance she had ever tasted, and it was quite tasty at that. The mixture of Donavarian honey, Marfo milk, and butter, which had been spread on the already tasty baniscus loaf, was giving Shanaeah a veritable taste-gasm. Shanaeah said,
"Oh, thank you so much, Crimmage. The bread is delicious and the water is quite tasty as well, and I was famished."
Ye be welcome, purdy lady. Would you like more from the flagon?
"Oh, yes, please."
Shanaeah took another long draw from the flagon and again felt the power of the spring water as it permeated her sore muscles, replenishing her strength. Crimmage was actually being nice. Well, to the degree an ogre can be nice. Perhaps she might venture a question at this point.
"Crimmage, why is it the Palatar is so interested in an alliance with the ogres? And what is her interest in me, for that matter?"
Them there is questions that Madame wouldn't take kindly to me, answering right now, little darling. Asides, none, that is of, concern to ye at this point at all. I reckon all you need be concerned with is how the madam is gonna treat you when she comes back.
And with that, Crimmage walked to the foot of the torture table, fondled Shanaeah in a quite unfriendly manner, and chuckled evilly as he walked away. It struck her as odd that he did not extinguish the torch before he left, which had been standard procedure over the course of her time in the dungeons. Perhaps since she had been condoled, it wasn't a concern anymore. Shanaeah thought to herself,
Filthy little prick. And I actually thought he was a bit nicer than the other ogres.
Then, as Shanaeah began to ponder her pending fate with Minerva, she heard something from the direction of the tiny metal grate, which was the only opening to the outside world she was afforded in her solitary captivity. It was a voice. A friendly voice.
Milady! Milady? Are you all right, milady?
Blessings inherent. Darvis? Is that you, Darvis?
Yes, milady, it is. Sorry to have taken so long, but I've journeyed all the way to Donaveris and back since you were taken by the Marfa witch.
Why?
We had to locate a sprite powerful enough to not only remove the condyle from your wrist, but to also supply you with a curse strong enough to overpower Minerva.
Genarian sprites with power of that magnitude are rare, even in Donaveris or Tenella. But please tell me you found one.
That we did, milady, and not just any sprite, but one who loves you as we do. One tied to you by blood, the sister of your mother, Renata.
Auntie Danine? Blessings inherent abound. She's here with you now, as we speak?
Indeed I am, dearie. Darvis and Pellegru sought me for quite some time in Penitri Forest, as I was at Loch Donaveris having power commune.
And we must digress yet again. A power commune is a ritual female Genarian sprites perform once every 28 days, in accordance with the cycle of the moon. It strengthens them physically, mentally, spiritually, and magically. It entails spending 4 to 5 hours alone with nature. A location where all 4 elements can be invoked, earth, wind, fire, and water, is preferable if one wishes to receive the most extensive renewal of strength possible. A series of incantations is recited over the course of the ritual, which aligns the sprite with the elements and enhances her ability to absorb the light needed to perform their magic. Male sprites don't undergo this ritual. A male sprite's power is first and foremost only a fraction as potent as that of a female sprite. Male sprites are usually capable of mastering 10 to 12 spells of the lesser variety. Secondly, a male sprite doesn't draw his magical power from light as female sprites do. It actually sort of rubs off on the males from the females that surround them. Send a male sprite to any location devoid of feminine sprite presence, and within 3 days his magical abilities will have worn off, so to speak. He will regain them once he has been in contact with females again for a few days. The only male sprites that possess magical prowess approaching the level of female sprites are the Solitarian sect, who also maintain their powers in the absence of any females. But that is the subject for another digression. I suppose we should add another short general note concerning sprites at this point. At some point in time, sprites became for the most part spirits who derive their powers from water and thrive in cooler climes. They enjoy mischief and trickery. Most folklore depicts them as miniature fairies who delight in deceiving humans. Of how they evolved from the benevolent creatures they were at the time of the telling of this story, there is no record. Perhaps in losing touch with the other 3 elements, they also lost touch with a large part of their love for all creatures. And as that diminished, their stature did as well, slowly becoming the size of insects. But back to the dungeon and the instruction of Auntie Danine.
Declossus Permanti.
Danine shouted as loud as she dared. And with that, the condyle fell from Shanaeah's wrist. She could feel the magic returning to her spirit as her sprite nature absorbed the light from the torch Crimmage had carelessly forgotten to extinguish. Danine then instructed her captive niece.
Now, listen carefully, dearie. You must learn these spells and recite them quickly and accurately when Minerva returns. Done properly, your escape is imminent.
Shanaeah quickly learned to recite the spells her auntie was teaching her. Hope now filled Shanaeah's heart. Perhaps she would not die at the hand of Minerva, the most evil being Shanaeah had ever encountered. Perhaps she would live to experience a loving touch again. Perhaps she would even seek revenge at some point. But first, She needed to master the spells Danine had given her. Yes, she must concentrate on that subject alone. Jerome shook himself and pulled his mind away from reliving the festivities of the previous evening. He could still smell the sweet, dank fragrance emanating from the lovely little gnome maid, but he had a feeling that he should not remain idle any longer. He had planned on spending 2 nights at the Wayward Maid before even making a decision about his next destination, but the feeling in his gut was telling him he should head eastward. Today, this very morning. Formulating his plan, Jerome decided he would pack, have a hot breakfast, and a word with Parthis before beginning his eastward trek. He wanted to know a bit about Denari, Parthis' wife, and Methila's relationship. Lying on the soft bed in his suite at the Maid, Jerome thought to himself,
could Denari be used to extract more information from Methila concerning Minerva's plans? But I must approach Parthis delicately. We will need him on our side throughout whatever Minerva has in store for us. Well, nothing for it but to carry on.
He eased out of the bed as gingerly as he could. As much as he would have liked to give Shanaeah a goodbye kiss, or more, he knew he couldn't afford the delay. So he packed as quietly as he could, and when he left the suite, the lovely gnome maiden was still pleasantly dreaming with her pretty china doll face semi-buried in the soft Bernie thistle pillow.
Such a sweet little lady. A sheer pleasure to be around. She has a talent for making a male feel good that has nothing to do with sex. Her demeanor is absolutely therapeutic. I will definitely ask for her the next time I visit the maid.
Pack in hand, Jerome made his way downstairs to the dining hall, and as he placed his breakfast order, he asked the serving wench if she would summon Parthis.
Yes, my lord, if he is available, I shall send him to you.
Jerome was halfway through his morning meal when Parthis appeared and seated himself at the table across from him.
Leaving us so soon, old friend. I was hoping to have you for 2 nights or more.
That was my original intention, but I fear it is important I head east this morning and bring tidings to my cousin in Beniscus.
Is it concerning the ogre screams coming from the distillery at night?
You're aware of that?
Yes. Merchants on their way to Norton and Prentice pass by the distillery en route. We get our share of them seeking lodging here at the Maid, as do the inns in Prentice. Being a splurt house as well, we perhaps get more. They tell of torturous screams all hours of the night. Do you know what it means, Jerome? I understand the Order hates the proc ogres, but they've never imprisoned and tortured them at the distillery, as I know of anyways.
No, sir. I can but speculate at this point about what is going on in the distillery. I dare not venture an opinion at this juncture, but I think I know of someone who could shed light on the subject, but unfortunately refuses.
Does she wear a condyle and have a penis?
This Noid certainly doesn't miss much. Observant to a fault, Jerome thought.
Yes, sir, she does. You were aware of my ulterior motive before I even arrived, you shrewd old Noid.
Parthis was making this too easy.
Yes, I actually expected you about a week ago when I heard news you had been seen on the western side of the forest of Penichery.
I had some business in Black Mountain that required tending first. Once that was settled, I spent a night in Pandana before rowing up Dissel Creek to spy on the goings-on at the distillery.
I won't ask. About Methila, though. You want Denari to see what she can get out of her. That is why you summoned me to disturb your breakfast, is it not?
Jerome chuckled.
I am just incapable of surprising you anymore, my friend. You've been 2 steps ahead of me since before I arrived. But, yes, that was my intention. How thick are Denari and Methila? Do you think Methila would divulge such information to her?
Hard to say. The simple fact that she is a former Panatessian means she keeps her business close to the vest. But she and Denari are quite thick, as you put it. They spend a lot of time together when Methila is off duty. I'd venture to say they are in love, as much as a former member of the Order can be in love. And taking that into account, Denari would never do anything to hurt someone she loves. And I would never hurt Denari. Hypothetically speaking, if we could assure Denari that Methila would be in no danger, then she would possibly try. But that's still no guarantee Methila will cooperate. To turn a witch is quite the trick, or so it's been said.
You are right about that for certain. There is a lot to ponder here. Hold steady until I can confer with my cousin. We don't want to spook Mathila before we can figure out a way to protect her from Minerva, should she decide to aid us. She knows I was fishing last night during our conversation, so her guard is already up. Best not to push her any farther right now.
So be it, my most intrepid Manista. Blessings inherent until we meet again.
Farewell, most illustrious Noid. May your ale stay cold and your maidens stay hot.
Daybreak. Renata stood outside the great gate of Baniscus to see the sortie off. 50 Baniscan soldiers, led by Lieutenant Ranaman, and 12 intel thieves under the charge of Denish, stood in front of the gate, packs shouldered and ready to mobilize. Renata walked up to Lieutenant Ranaman and lifted her short skirt. She turned and extended her lovely sprite bottom, and the lieutenant patted her soft round butt 3 times. Short digression. Patting a Genarian sprite 3 times on her rear end was a brief ritual which was said to bring good fortune to the person who does the patting. Renata then approached Denish and lifted her skirt to pass on her luck to him as well.
Bring my daughter back to me. Blessings inherent upon you all.
And with that they were off to rescue the daughter of their lord and his beloved concubine.